So in this video, we're going to be looking at a trig function that has all 4 different phases, where we're going to see a change in the amplitude, period, midline, and phase shift. So let's start with the amplitude here. So amplitude, we have a 3 in front, so I know that my amplitude is 3. And what I also noticed is that this is a sine graph. So one of the things I always do when I'm thinking about what I want to graph is to visualize, do I have a sine graph or do I have a cosine graph? And if I have a sine graph, then I know it goes from 0 to 2 pi for a sine graph, and it has that S-shaped curve, typically, right? So this is what a typical sine graph looks like. And for my case here, I have a -2 on the outside, so that tells me my vertical shift, and this has a minus sign, so this is going down 2. So my midline is going to not be at 0, it's going to be at -2. The period here, let's take a look. So my B value is 2. So I'm actually gonna first divide that out. So factoring out the 2, I have x minus pi divided by 2. So I did that pretty quickly, so let's double check if that's correct. 2 times x does give you 2x. If I multiply 2 with pi over 2, the 2 from the bottom would cancel and leaving me with just pi. So this does work out, and now I can see that my phase shift is a negative sign, so this goes right, and there's a pi over 2, so this goes right pi over 2. And my period is just a 2 for my B, so this period could be, let's see, 2 pi divided by B. My B is 2, so if I divide, the 2's we cancel, so I'm just left with pi. So my period is pi. So now that we have all 4 components, I'm going to start drawing the picture here. The first thing I always like to start with is actually the midline. So the midline is at -2, which is a little bit lower than usual. So when I draw this graph here, I might want to make more room for the bottom since I'm already in the negative region. So this is at -2. I'm going to draw a dashed line to represent the midline. And from here, I can use my amplitude to go 3 units up. So if I were to go 3 units up, I would land at +1. So I know that +1 is going to be the highest that my graph will go. Now I also have to go 3 units down to show my negative, the lowest that it will go. So it will go down to, not -3, let's see, -2, -3, -4, -5. My bad. And then from here, I need to start with my period and my phase shift. So my phase shift says that it shifts from 0, so it's not starting at 0 this time, it's starting at pi over 2 to the right. So I'm going to shift this and just write pi over 2. So I'm not starting at 0, I'm starting at pi over 2, so my graph should like start here when it starts its cycle. So thinking about how far it reaches after it's been shifted, the whole cycle is going to take 1 period. So if I were to add on 1 period, I would be adding on a length of pi. So one thing I could do is take the period and add it to the phase shift that I start off with. So to the side here, I like to kind of do this math where I take pi over 2, where I'm starting, and add a full cycle length, or the period, so which is pi. If I were to add these two, I would need a common denominator, so I would need a 1 in the bottom. I would make a common denominator by changing the pi to 2 pi over 2, which is also still 1 pi. So if I were to add the top here, I would have pi plus 2 pi, which gives me 3 pi on the top, over 2. So I know the furthest that will extend to make 1 full cycle is 3 pi over 2, so I'll just write that a little bit further out. Now, when I draw this picture here, I'm going to draw the S-shaped curve that I need, where I'm starting at the midline, going up, then down, and then back to the midline for sine. So this is going to really help to look at the original graph to help me understand where I'm drawing from the midline. Now, sine usually has like a halfway point where it touches the midline. So from pi over 2 to 3 pi over 2, the midline would be 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Or if you want to write 2 pi over 2, that just helps. So this is 1 pi over 2. This would be 2 pi over 2. This would be 3 pi over 2. So if I were to draw this picture here, I would be starting like how sine starts at 0 on the midline. I'm going to have to start at the phase shift, which is pi over 2. And then at 2 pi over 2, or pi, it should hit the midline, kind of like how it does on pi. But in between, it should hit the highest point. So the halfway point is about maybe right there. And so it would hit the maximum, come back down. And then this part would hit the minimum. So this is at 3 pi over 2, it would come back to the midline, just like how it would be at 2 pi. But in between this, it should hit the lowest point, which is at -5. And there we go. We have our graph. So now we can kind of see that from pi over 2 to 3 pi over 2, this is one full cycle, and that would be about 1 period long for one cycle. And it has been shifted to pi over 2 to the right, and we have our graph. For this next equation here, we have a cosine graph. So in my mind already, I'm sort of imagining a cosine graph. Now, this cosine graph does have a negative sign, so that is nice to remember that we do need to flip this graph. So cosine has typically a U-shaped life curve, and I always like to do a quick little sketch of what cosine looks like. It just helps me get into the rhythm of things. So cosine usually looks like that, a U shape, but if we flip it, it's going to be kind of like a bell shape or an upside down U, like that. So that is what it's going to look like before it shifts. So let's take a look at how many shifts we have here. So there's a -2 in front. My amplitude is going to be 2. My vertical shift, there's a +2, so this tells me it's going to go up 2 units. So the midline would be at y equals 2. The period, let's see, let's find the phase shift. There's a 3 in front, so I have to divide the 3 out, or factor the 3 out. So I'm left with 6, bring down the x, and this is 6. Divide out 3, that would give me -2 pi. Let's double check here. 3 times x is 3x. I divided this 3 out, so that is a 2. So 3 times -2 pi does give me a 6 pi. So this works. So from here, I can see I have a -2 pi. So this is going right 2 pi. And I need to find my period. My b is 3. So my period is going to be 2 pi over my b, which is 3. So my period is 2 pi over 3. So not a very easy period to work with, but we'll learn how to figure it out here. So I'm going to start drawing my graph. And like I said before, start with your midline, because that tells you where you're going to be drawing, from the midline, you're going to be drawing your amplitude, from how high you're going or how low you're going. So it really helps to draw the midline first. And the midline's at +2. So because I'm in the positive region, I'm going to make more space in the positive side. I'm going to draw some dashed lines to help represent the midline at +2. And my amplitude is 2, so I need to go down 2, so that would get me back down to 0. If I go up 2 from the midline, I'd be at +4. So the highest I would go is +4. The lowest I would go is 0. From here, I do want to add in my phase shift. So it's been shifted 2 pi. So let's just pretend this from 0 to this mark right here is 2 pi. To make one full cycle, I have to go out 2 pi over 3. So I'm going to add on from 2 pi over 3 this direction. So I need to know how far did I go out when I went 2 pi over thirds. So let's do the math. If I take 2 pi and I add 2 pi over 3, I can put this 2 pi over 1, make it a common denominator of 3 by multiplying 3 to the top and bottom. So that would give me 6 pi over 3 plus 2 pi over 3. That is 8 pi. 6 plus 2 is 8. So 8 pi over 3, which I can't reduce. So that means if I were to extend out one full cycle, which is 2 pi over 3, this would go out to 8 pi over 3. Now from here, I need to figure out the halfway point. So if I were to think about 2 pi for a moment, 2 pi is technically, in terms of, a denominator of 3, this would be 6 pi over 3, right? I think I actually changed the denominator here for 2 pi, which was 6 pi over 3. So this is 6 pi, this is 8 pi. Halfway between 6 and 8 is 7. So I always have to figure out the halfway point because that's usually when cosine hits the lowest point, and I need to know where that is. So this is 7 pi over 3 is the halfway point. Okay, I think I got all the intervals that I need on the x-axis, so I'm ready to go now. So here's my midline. Cosine does not start at the midline. Cosine typically starts at positive 1, but because we have a flipped, we have a negative sign, we're going to flip it, so it's going to start at negative 1 or the lowest point. So for us, this is going to start at the lowest point, which is 0. But it's not going to start at 0 for x, it's going to start at 2 pi because we've shifted over. So this is going to start at 2 pi at 0. And at the middle here is going to be the highest point. So for cosine, the highest point here is going to be positive 4. And then back down to 0 when we end the cycle. So to draw our bell-shaped curve, this is going to go up, then back down. Mine's probably a little bit more crooked than usual. But we can kind of see like between 2 pi and 7 pi over 3, it should be hitting the midline. And then from 7 pi to 8 pi over 3, it should also be hitting the midline. So there we go. We have our U-shape curve for cosine. So that's it for this video. I highly recommend to try out some of the practice problems down below to practice being able to do those phase shifts and shifting the period as well. I know that is the hardest part for graphing trig functions, so definitely try out some of the problems below to beef up your skills. All right, that's it for this video. Bye guys.